Story 1. For some background before I start, I live in the most northern part of Norway, which is also the most northern part of Europe. My home is well above the Arctic Circle. For those of you who know where, this means that we have very short summers where the sun never sets and very long winters where the sun never rises. Those long and cold months of darkness in the end and beginning of the year have made us into an understandably superstitious kind. There are many tales meant to safeguard us. Growing up, you have Stallo the mountain troll who steals children who wander too far away from their home. You have the Ming who you will not see, but you can hear it stalk you, letting out the cries of a baby, and the Knock who lies in waiting beneath the surface of lakes and rivers, waiting to drown any unsuspecting swimmer. My story begins when I was 16 years old. I had just gotten my hunting license, and my father had even bought me a shotgun for my birthday. This was big for me, as I'd always followed my father on hunting trips as a child, but I'd never actually shot a grouse myself. My father is the stereotypical northern Norwegian. He knows everything about the outdoors, and he can endure any hardship or weather with the same unwavering sense of humor. Once his fingers got stuck in a saw at his workplace and peeled the skin off of his middle finger like a banana peel. He promptly bandaged it up by himself and kept going. He did not consider going to the doctors to get it looked at for almost 2 weeks, and the stench of his bandages made him unbearable to stay in close proximity with. In the end, he needed a skin transplant and several weeks off of work before his hand was remotely usable again. So the time of the year comes where the sun is out for a few hours in the morning, and me and my dad take the journey to the cabin. This includes an hour of driving and a further hour on a boat. You see, our cabin is in a remote area without any road access, so the only way to get there is by a ferry. This means we somewhat always know who is out there, since most people only stay over the weekend when there are no holidays, and the ferry only goes Fridays and Sundays during the weekend. That being said, there are never more than a handful of people out there at the same time, spread out on an area that is roughly larger than my hometown. This time, on the other hand, it was only me and my father taking the ferry that Friday, so I knew we were going to be left alone over the weekend. Arriving on that small pier by the cabin, I could finally breathe in the fresh air of untouched nature that has always been soothing for my soul. It's like you leave behind all your troubles at home, because out here they are irrelevant. At the cabin, the only things that matter are the things that keep you safe, warm, and fed. We then dug out our snowmobile that was parked near the pier and drove the short trip over to the cabin. That night, we mostly spent preparing noose traps and lunch for the next day. My father told old store of when he went hunting back in the day and such, and we shared in a ceremonial hunter shot of single malt whiskey. I slept well that night, as I normally do when the peace and quiet of the cabin comes over me. We got out of the cabin late the following morning, due to us just enjoying the calming of a morning with no obligations. This would turn out to be a mistake, however. You see, the key point is to be out early. See, you can utilize the sunlight as much as possible. We knew this, but sometimes you just want to sit down and eat a lazy breakfast and watch morning TV. When we had arrived at the Lao, imagine a winter version of a teepee that we had set up that summer next to a lake, which was now frozen. Of course, my father decided that he would take it easy that day and get the lavu warmed up so that when I returned from the mountain there would be warm food and drink. Way for me, I had previously spent a lot of time by myself around that area, so walking around the mountain alone never bothered me, and still doesn't to this day. So I started walking up the mountain overlooking the lake. It was difficult due to the heavy snow and me not bringing my skis. Instead, I opted for using an old pair of snowshoes that were hanging in the cabin. This resulted in me using up way more time than needed to get up to where I could find some grooves I might shoot, as I knew from previous experiences that this was an area they would be in. After a lot of effort, I made it up, and the area, despite being full of tracks and feces, was abandoned. It had snowed the night before and part of the morning, so the tracks must have been somewhat fresh, yet I could not hear or see anything. So I stalked the forest on that mountain for an hour without any traces of life. That is probably when I noticed the silence. It's like what people with similar experiences say, there's always this deafening silence that preludes something bad, like all the animals know. To get out of there, I remembered for the first time since childhood that I felt uneasy about being alone up there, but of course I was not about to go empty-handed back to my father, so I continued as I was walking around. Listening intently to any sound that might give away any form of life, I remembered being amazed at how loudly my footprints were, even though I walked as slow and controlled as humanly possible. The uneasy feeling creeping closer and closer to the point where I decided to take a quick snack break and regain my previous calm state of mind as I walked back to the clearing overlooking the lake. My footsteps seemed to almost lighten and I felt more relaxed and at ease again. I sat down on a rock and ate a bar of chocolate I brought and enjoyed the sun on my face, ridiculing myself for being spooked of what essentially was nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps coming from the direction I'd just been in, loud and heavy footsteps of a grown man. I know this because, as anyone can tell you, the sound of a bipedal walking on 2 feet is quite distinct from four-legged creatures such as moose or bear, especially in the heavy snow. I tried calling out because I immediately thought it was my father who had a change of heart, yet there was no reply. I sat there on the rock, watching the direction of the footsteps as they grew louder and louder. Several times I called out and yet I received no reply. Feeling uneasy again, I decided to take out my phone and try to call my father. There on my phone, I had an unread message from my father. Delivered 3 minutes ago. Coffee and lunch is ready. Simultaneously, the footsteps were somehow getting louder and louder, and I knew whatever was at the other end was not my father. This, and no knowing that we were supposed to be the only 2 people in a radius of many kilometers, made me instantly jump up. I grabbed my shotgun and Ned out of there. As soon as I had tightened my snowshoes, as I was making my way, I could hear whatever was stalking me pick up the pace, and I realized that the sound of my own footsteps and whatever it was that was after me were almost synchronized to the point that there was only a slight difference, and when our feet hit the ground I've realized since then that whatever it was had followed me since I'd entered the forest on the mountain, and it was the cause of why I felt like my footsteps were abnormally loud. I remember trying my best to run in hip-deep snow, not caring that the thick layers of branches hit my cold face, leaving red marks all over. It came to the point where I could hear the extra pair of footsteps no more than maybe 5 behind me, yet when I turned around there was nothing. I pushed with all I had, and when I finally managed to reach the frozen lake on the other side from the lava, the extra pair of footsteps just stopped. Exhausted by the kilometer-plus run in waist-deep snow, I made my way to the lough. My father seemed almost amused by how tired I seemed. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and asked if I saw anything. I didn't know what to say and was honestly embarrassed by what had occurred, so I said only that I'd spotted many tracks, yet no birds. However, in the later years, I've asked him about this and other strange occurrences around the area, and the answers have always been roughly the same. Don't worry about it, and don't ask about it. Some things are better ignored. Last night, I was doing some Christmas shopping alone at a local TJ Maxx. I rarely ever go shopping alone, especially in the evening. Usually I have my kids or my husband with me. I am browsing around aimlessly, kind of just all over the store. I'm not really sure what I'm going to get. I see this young guy, probably early 20s, skinny with glasses. I don't think anything of it. I went to a different spot. I see him again. He is in the same aisle picking stuff up to look at and then putting them back. He didn't have a cart or anything. My red flags were not raised yet. I then see him a third time in a different area doing the same thing, but now stopping and texting someone. My senses start to perk up a bit, like, okay, this is weird, but I'm not nervous yet per se, but I am more aware. Then it happens again, and this time I know something is weird. He's following me all over the store, and there's nothing to buy, so I start kind of zigzagging through the store. I find a coat I want to try on. At this point I was very wary, but at the same time also thinking I'm being ridiculous and paranoid, but I just had this strong sense that this was not normal. I went into a dressing room for about 15 minutes, hoping I would lose him. I came out, and I did not see him for another 20 minutes. I was relieved, thinking I was definitely being paranoid, and he probably left. I go to the checkout after almost an hour and a half of shopping with a sea full of stuff. I was the only one in line. I get called to cash out, and I turn around, and this man is immediately behind me in the checkout. He came out of nowhere. He had one item, a cheap little decoration. At this point, I was full on panicking. The cashier could tell I was being weird and very distracted, at the risk of sounding crazy. I almost didn't say anything, but I told her that I think this man is following me. She was extremely empathetic and didn't seem very surprised. She said, "I'm so sorry, I will have someone walk you to your car." I was so thankful for her kindness. The man checked out with this one item and left the store with an older man who I didn't see before. The older man had nothing that he had bought. The parking lot at the store is a huge dark plaza. I did not want to go outside alone. I just knew it was a very bad idea. The cashier asked another employee to walk me out. She was younger than me, but so sweet. I apologized profusely because it was sleeting and cold rain, and she had no coat on. She said, "I don't care if it's downpouring, I would still walk you to your car." It was so sweet, really. She walked me all the way away and even waited until I pulled out and drove away. The whole time I was shaking like a leaf. I've heard this happen to so many women, but I kind of thought they might be paranoid or exaggerating. This was extremely scary. Though the more I think about it, the creepier it gets. He followed me around the entire store, and everywhere I turned there he was. I have no idea what his deal was, but this was so unsettling. My husband freaked out and does not want me to shop alone anymore. I don't really want to shop alone anymore. If I had not been paying attention or dismissed my bad feelings, something bad may have happened. As a woman, being aware of our surroundings is so important. For some information before I start, I'm from Texas, so I don't have many shoes with treading on them. The ones I had gotten too worn and eventually tore, and I needed to buy some new ones. Also, I'm a chubby 5 feet 4 inches in girl, and this was 8 o'clock at night. This also happened on a very popular and busy street. I live in Chicago for school, and I needed to get some things before the polar vortex. The school I go to is near State Street, and I decided to go to Walgreens that was near the Chicago Theater. I had to stop by Target and then at Walgreens as I purchased everything and made sure I packed it all, and I headed out to the doors. As I walked toward the exit, I noticed a tall man was headed in the same direction at the same time, so I decided to let him go first. But he just stood there staring at me. He didn't make any gestures, but I still thought, oh, maybe he wants to be nice and be a gentleman, so I went ahead first and he followed. I noticed that it had started slushing and knew I was going to start sliding everywhere because the boots I had on had very thin tread on it, so I had to slow down on my walking or I'd fall on my ass. I start walking, and it's at this point that I notice him walking the same pace as me. I thought I was in his way. I also thought that the sidewalk is extremely big and he could easily walk around me. I stepped to the side and to see if he would go around or something, but his shadow followed right behind me. I tried walking a little faster, but I could already feel myself slipping and losing balance. He ended up walking a little faster to catch up to me, and soon he was right next to me, matching my walking pace. I asked if he needed anything, but he didn't reply. When I was in front of the theater, he ended up going in front of me and just stopped me in my tracks. I tried to go to the left of him, but he steps in front to cut me off my path. I tried to go to the right, and he did the same thing. I paced a little faster, and he end up just circling around me. He ends up blocking my path again and gets a cigarette out and just gets right up in my face and tried to light it, but he couldn't because of the slush and wind. I took that chance to slide away from him, but he keeps trying to cut in front of me while lighting the cigarette. I made it to the CTA stop to go downstairs, but because he was really tall, he used his massive body to block the stairs in front of me. He was still bearing me down, and I wasn't sure what to do at that point. To my luck, though, an older woman was coming through, and he let her through. I dashed through the small opening he'd made for her and asked if I could stick with her because of my situation. She was really understanding and said of course I wanted to tell CTA personnel, but of course there was no one in the booth. We took out our cards at the same time, and we went through the turnstiles at the same time. He saw that I partnered up with her and tried to dash to us, but he ran out of money or something because he didn't go through. Till a few minutes later, my new friend and I started making small talk to calm me down a bit and asked what train I was going to get on and what my stop was. To our surprise, we were headed the same direction with the exact same stop. He followed us down and was still smoking his cigarette, but that's when the CTN noticed and was walking towards him. He turned around so that he could smoke his cigarette fast, which meant that he was looking away from us. At that point our train arrived and we both got on. He saw us and tried to get on, but he missed it by a few seconds. We both thought that was a close call. We continued to talk Even after we got off at our stop, and to our surprise she basically dropped me off at home because she lived a block further up ahead of me, so to the smoker CTA creep, let's not meet. Again, when I was in my second year of university, I lived alone. It was a downstairs flat with my bedroom facing towards the street. I had some heavy green curtains, so I didn't mind too much. My friends lived about a 15-minute walk away, and I would go over every day until sometimes like 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. or sleep. Over I had a long-distance boyfriend at the time, and would sometimes be up late Skype sexing. Halloween rolls around and I'm out with my friends. I decide to go back to mine and be a sexy Skype Supergirl for my boyfriend. We get into it, we're having a great time. Curtains closed, lights off, just to be safe. I'd had a drunk man try to get in one time. I fell asleep early and left the curtains open. It was really creepy. I woke up to the sounds of someone trying to push open the front door. When I looked up, there was a man staring, stood so close. His nose almost touched the window. I freaked out and spent the night in the living room, so the lights were off. Curtains shut. I noticed a kind of flickering in my peripheral and looked around while meeting at the bottom. The curtains parted very slightly near the top. Through the gap, there appears to be a trail of steam rising. I cover myself and get up to investigate. I have to get up and stand on my tiptoes to see. Through the source of the steam was a man's mouth, hunched over and panting, exposed at the waist, doing what you think he'd be doing. I tried to quickly rearrange the curtains, grabbing my laptop and hiding in the living room. A few days later, there's a pink envelope waiting for me when I walk through the door. As I pick it up, various small change falls out. Written on the lip of the envelope in jagged capital letters, I mean you no harm, with 3 X's. A horrible cold feeling spread throughout my body, dread overlapped by shock. I'd never felt anything like it. I turned the card over to read the address side there in the same handwriting to the girl in the front room. Opening it, I see it's a quite traditional sort of card, cream with a delicate watercolor of a bouquet on the front, thinking of you, in gold curvature. Next to it, the inside was completely covered by a message in capitals, some letters backwards and words misspelled. I gave the card to the police, so I can't recite the whole passage for Tim, but the essence was, I'm an old man who has lived on the street for a long time. You've made me the happiest I've ever been in my life. On Halloween, I'm sorry I scared you. You were very beautiful. I love to watch you. Whether you're working on your computer or touching yourself, please leave your curtains open just a little bit for me. For each time you do this, I will post a couple of pounds through the letterbox. Signed, Can. I called my friends, then got the police to come around. Basically, they couldn't really do anything. They took the card as evidence, gave me a case number, and said that they would get the patrol C to drive past my house for the near future. I stayed at my friend's for a week and had one of them stay over at mine. After that, that wasn't quite the last of K, and sometimes there would be knocking at my window, but I kept my curtains 100% closed. 3 or 4 months of no incidents later, we got snow. I was leaving my house now, in the habit of checking my curtains every time I left or got back to the house. I see a set of footprints tracing the entire front window, back and forth, like someone had been pacing. After I moved, my friend had a job where she could check the local electoral register. We did find that a K. Mordew lived on my previous street. We did no further investigations because it was a studenty area. I would walk past that house on my way home for the next 2 years. A while after I'd moved out, I saw that the window had been completely covered in newspaper stuck from the inside. It seemed like someone was having trouble with Ken still coming around, so Ken, let's not meet again. I'm a 22-year-old female. At the time of this incident, I was about 16 or 17 years old. Because of what happened, I now never walk anywhere by myself after dark. I decided to sneak out to meet up with a friend, but neither of us had a car, so we were going to walk and meet up halfway between our houses. The halfway point was about a 40-minute walk. We ended up meeting at around midnight, and the walk there went fine, no issues. We hung out for a while and ended up losing track of time, and it was around 3 a.m. I had to get home before my parents woke up for work or risk getting caught. We said our goodbyes, and I started on my long walk back home. Since it was 3 in the morning, it was basically a ghost town, not a single person in sight. I hadn't seen even a single car drive past, so I figured I would have a nice walk home. I was wrong. About 10 minutes into my walk, I heard a car coming up behind me. Nothing too alarming about that. As the car passed me, they slammed on their brakes, then cut off all their lights. Immediately a red flag. I saw the car turned down the next street ahead. I knew I would have to pass them to get home. Instead, I ran into a nearby parking lot and hid in the bushes and pulled out my phone to call my sister to, at the very least, let someone know where I was at and what was happening, and to call 911 if needed. I unlocked my phone and of course 1%, then my phone died. As soon as this happened, I started to panic. I waited there for what seemed like forever and decided to start towards home again. I started walking again and past the street they turned on and didn't see any cars. I started to relax until I walked a little bit further and saw the very same car parked in the Burger King parking lot. As soon as they saw me, they started to back out of the parking lot and head towards me. I bolted across to the other side of the street, and instead of staying on the same road, I ducked into a neighborhood that would let me go back to the main road, but closer to my house. I got back onto the main road and thought I was in the clear. Then sure enough, the creep was driving towards me. And as soon as he passed me, he made a U-turn so that way he can follow me. Again, driving slow enough to be directly behind me. Luckily, another car was coming up behind him, so he was forced to speed up. I saw him up ahead going to turn around again. I took this opportunity to lay down in the grass between someone's fence and the sidewalk, just out of sight so any passing cars could not see me. After he passed again, I got up and started sprinting towards a neighborhood that would lead me out to another main road that my house is off of. I made it to the main road and was so close to my house, but again I see that car. He passed me and started turning around. I ran across the street and through this field and hopped my neighbor's fence, cut across my court and ran inside. I'd never been so happy to be home. This guy followed me for my entire walk home. I'm not sure what would have happened if I had just kept walking and ignored all the warning signs, but I know his intentions were not good. It was by far the scariest thing to ever happen to me. So creep that followed me for 40 minutes. Let's never meet. In 2019, I moved to a post-Soviet country for work. There's this American diner I always go to on Saturdays for lunch. It's a one-of-a-kind place in the city, owned by this half-Cuban guy who loves the USA. Not surprisingly, the place attracts lots of American expats who want to feel home. It takes me around 25 minutes to get there walking from my apartment, but as it gets extremely cold during winter months, I always take a taxi that drops me off next to a big mall on the opposite side of the narrow street where the diner is. It's hard to describe it, but the best way to reach the restaurant's entrance is by crossing the fenced garden of an old wooden church. It's an Orthodox church from the 19th century turned into a museum. It's now surrounded by massive office buildings. The garden is small. You can cross it in 3 minutes, and the exit gate faces the restaurant. During winter, snow covers it completely. It was a Saturday morning, January if I recall, and the snow was fresh on the floor. I was walking to the diner when I noticed unusual footprints in the snow, as if someone was walking in circles back and forth and for a long period, but there was nobody around and all of the office buildings seemed to be closed. I keep walking. All of a sudden, a man that was hiding behind the church reveals himself. He doesn't look hostile, but there's something extremely odd about him. He's wearing baggy jeans, a dirty hoodie, and a blue cap. He approaches me smiling. He starts walking on my side. "Hey there," he says in English. "Hey," I respond. "Where are you from?" "Don't be afraid, I like foreigners." His English is surprising. "Ly good." I keep walking in silence. "You don't need to be afraid, my friend. I'm part of the couch surfing community. I'm a nice guy." Look, he tries to show me something on his phone, maybe his couch surfing profile page. "Would you stay at my place?" he asks. "No dude, thank you," I say, and then he says, "Okay, would you give me some money to buy us both coffee?" You don't have to come with me." At that moment, I was already in front of the restaurant and casually opened the door to enter. He didn't follow me. 2 weeks later, same Saturday routine lunch at the diner, and then back home. On my way, I decided to grab a coffee at a nearby place. As I'm walking to the shop, I feel someone following me. It's him again, and wearing the same clothes. We make eye contact, and he starts laughing. Then he proceeds to do an extremely creepy thing. He hides behind a bus stop that has glass panels on the sides and keeps staring at me. I mean, I could see him. He was being a complete creep on purpose. I enter the coffee shop and tell the barista, "Hey, there's a guy following me." The girl looks at me worried and says something to the security guard. The guy enters the shop the moment the door closes behind him. The barista looks at the guard, who immediately removes him from the place. They were so fast it almost seemed as if they knew him. Thankfully, I never saw him Again, back in my college days, several friends and I went to Lake Havasu, Arizona for spring break. Those of you who have been probably hung around London Bridge Resort, at some point next to the hotel area there's a walking path that follows a canal which leads under the old London Bridge and then to Lake Havasu itself. This canal allows people to park their boats within walking distance to the resort. One night, 3 of my friends and I went for a stroll along this path. During our walk we heard some shouting which went along the lines of be cool, we're leaving, man, just be cool. My group hung back for a bit, and after a second a group of guys came up. We asked them what was going on, and they said there were 2 guys in a boat. They were flashing people in the face with a spotlight, talking and pissing them off, then pulling out a pistol when they were about to get their asses kicked. We will refer to the guys in the boat as douchebags from here on out. So my group decided that we weren't going to stand for this and came up with a plan. We continued down the pathway to douchebag's boat and played dumb. We asked them what those guys were so scared of being the smug, self-satisfied little douches they were. Said those guys wanted to pick a fight with us, so I pulled my gat on them. It was actually an old .38 revolver. At that point I knew this was going to be easy. You see, one of the members of our group was a girl, a pretty girl wearing a bikini and cut-off jean shorts. She laid on the dumb bimbo card and in no time had them eating out of her hand. She said, "I've never seen a gun before. Is it heavy? Do you have any more?" Those handed her the gun to hold and said, "No, that's the only one." She then handed it to our buddy Jay, who was 6 feet 4 inches, 280 pounds, wall of meat. Jay threw that gun close to 250 feet away into the canal, which made a very satisfying thunk when it hit the water. Both douchebags were completely speechless. It took them close to 20 seconds just to process what had happened. Finally, one of them spoke and was all, "What the why did you do that? You better go get it." We just laughed and said, "No, we won't think about that next time you're flashing people with that spotlight." After a few moments of incoherent shouting, one of them tried to get into Jay's face. For some stupid reason he didn't even make it out of his boat, and Jay shoved him back into his seat hard enough that it broke. Neither one of the douchebags were very big. Our female friend could have taken them. Our other buddy Jace told them to go park somewhere else for the night, because if we saw them again we would kick their asses for real. So they pulled off, and when they were out and away from us they started talking again, but we just kept laughing at them. After they were gone we finished our walk and went back to the hotel and started partying again. It was a great night, so if any of you make it out that way again, get your snorkel out. There's an old rusted piece of pistol at the bottom of the canal by London Bridge Resort. I am a 31-year-old woman. This happened a few years back. I was walking from a friend's house to meet my son's father, who's now my ex, at a bar we frequented in those days. It was winter, icy and snowing with giant piles of snow all around. I was walking from a friend's house around 9 p.m. down an alley that served as a driveway area for many houses. Not a great neighborhood, but not particularly bad either. I was wearing my Apocalypse boots, waterproof, knee-high Winter Pro. I usually have headphones on blaring music while I walk, but that night for some reason I decided it not to. In hindsight, that is what saved me. I'm about the equivalent of 2 to 3 blocks away from the bar. There's a younger guy, early 20s, walking about 50 ft behind me. "Hey, you!" I turn around. It seems he's talking to someone else. "Hey!" I look back, then continue walking. "Yeah, you." "No, don't turn around, sweetheart." I start to walk faster as I realize he's getting closer. Ahead of me, I see an SUV running backed out of a parking spot, but blocking my path. I turn around. There's another guy. The door to the SUV opens, and there's a couple of guys in it looking at me. One gets out and stands by the open door. I turn to look at the guy behind me. Out of nowhere, about 5 more guys come out, surrounding me from a distance, slowly closing in. The realization that they were hiding behind piles of plowed snow hits me. I realized they're just standing and watching me. A couple of them had their phones out and were recording something that was about to go down. Nobody was smiling, but they were closing in on me, trying to get me to walk to the SUV. Fight or flight kicked in, and I decided I didn't want to know what was about to happen. I wanted to catch them off guard, so instead of running forward, I bolted to the left. I ended up cutting through a few yards and made it to the bar. "So guys is trying to get me into your SUV while filming. Let's not." Story 2. Meet when I was young. From the ages of 2 to 10, I lived on a 7-acre ranch. There was a small house in the front of the property where we lived, a huge grass yard and cabinet shop behind it, and an orchard in the very back full of walnut trees. My father was a carpenter that always worked in the shop, and my mother was a school teacher that was almost always busy because of their jobs and the fact that they were new to parenting. As I got older, they didn't really pay as much attention as they should have to. Where I would wander off, I would spend my days roaming around the yard, playing in the dirt and running through the walnut trees. I obviously didn't question my lack of supervision, as it was fun to explore this huge plot of land, and I just thought I was being a normal kid. When I was about 7 years old, my father surprised me with a brand new child-sized ATV. It wasn't one of the electric ones that you're probably picturing either. It was damn fast gas-powered four-wheeler. Now at this point, a good amount of you are probably questioning why someone would give a gas-powered ATV to a 7-year-old child, but like I said, my parents were a bit reckless, and my dad just wanted me to have fun. Pretty much right after I got the thing, I learned how to ride it by myself and started going farther into and past the property than I ever had before. I now had a free right to basically as far as my young self would let me go before turning back. I started riding through the orchards behind my house almost every day, and I loved it more than I had loved anything before. I would leave my house and be gone for hours. After a while, I gradually started roaming farther and farther away from my house. As I became more brazen and a little older, I would ride down this dirt path that leads past what I assumed was our neighbor's land and onto a ditch that held water. At the time, I just liked looking through the water as it flowed, and I felt like I was a little explorer. I honestly never contemplated that what I was doing could be the least bit dangerous, and I really don't think my parents knew how far I was riding. When I think back on it now, just the idea of riding a pretty dangerous piece of equipment far away from my house without my parents knowing where I was, and before cell phones existed, is pretty scary in itself, as I could have crashed or hit my head and no one would have been able to find me. However, luckily this never happened and is not what this story is about. So one day, like every other, I was riding far away from home, and I passed by a man wearing a dirty white shirt, denim jeans, and a wicker farmer's hat. I remember it vividly, as it was the first person I'd seen in all the time I'd been out there. I remember the surprised look in his eyes as he stared at me while I rode past him. I had no reason to stop, and my parents had always taught me about stranger danger, so I kept going and forgot about it on my way back home. A couple hours later, I was coming up to the same spot, and it dawned on me that this is where I'd seen the man. I looked ahead, not expecting him to be there. As I said, it had been hours, yet as the trees parted, there he was. I really didn't think it was too weird, because I figured that he was either a farmer or a homebody, so I kept driving. Coming closer to where he was, he seemed friendly. To be honest, he had a big smile on his face, like he was happy to see me. To my 10-year-old self, I just thought he was a friendly guy, so I waved at him as I passed by, and he waved back. I continued on my way and drove home, not thinking much about it. I don't really remember how much time it passed between then and the next time I went riding, but it couldn't have been more than a couple days. Like usual, I took the same dirt road, past the same few orchards, to the same ditch full of water. I didn't think much about my previous encounter, so I hadn't been thinking about the stranger with the big smile. I was sitting on the edge of the ditch when I heard footsteps in the dirt coming up from behind me again. I remember this video vividly because it was not a common occurrence to see anyone on this trail. I remember being more curious than scared, and turned around to see the same stranger with a smile. This time his smile seemed to be more of a toothy grin. He called out to me as he walked up, asking what my name was in a heavy southern drawl. I told him with confidence that I wasn't really allowed to talk to strangers, to which he said, "That's a good idea, although you really shouldn't be out here all by yourself. It can be dangerous for a kid your age." I remember this striking me in the gut with a little bit of butterfly feeling. I wasn't afraid, but I felt uneasy. This piqued my curiosity, however, as I wondered what he meant, so I asked him. He continued to walk closer to me slowly and answered, "I heard they found a little boy out here just around your age. I think it was that ditch right there where he drowned." I would like to point out here that although my parents were reckless, they were not stupid. If there had been a drowning near our house that was reported, or there had been a story in the paper, they definitely wouldn't have let me out anymore. Anyways, he continued, "Why don't you come with me and I'll take you back to your parents? It's not safe out here for a kid your age." It's okay, I have my quad right here. I'll just ride back." I pointed over to the side of him where my quad But he didn't look. His eyes remained fixed on me. They were deep brown, almost black, and piercing into me. At this point I was scared, and I knew that this could be a bad situation. I was hoping that he was just a concerned old man, but there was no way I was going with him anywhere. I got to my feet to start walking to my quad, to which the man said, "Should a kid your age be riding something that dangerous, let's just put it in my truck, and I'll give you a ride back." "I don't see a truck," I said, looking around, hoping to talk my way out of the situation. "Oh, it's right over there on my property. You can't see it from here," he said, his smile widening. "It's really okay, I'll just go now," I said, starting again to walk to my quad, but as I passed him, he reached and grabbed my arm. "You really shouldn't be out here," he said, staring me deep in the eyes. "It's not safe for little kids. Let me go, you're hurting me," I shouted, starting to panic, but this only made him grip tighter. "Maybe you don't deserve to go back home. What kind of parents would let their kid out here all alone? Maybe you should come home with me, and I'll take care of you." At this point I was about to piss my pants. I was freaking out and started to scream. I don't know if I was saying anything, I just know I was screaming as loud as I ever had before. This only seemed to anger him, as his once toothy grin turned to a face of anger. He put his hand over my face, and I took this opportunity to bite his finger as hard as I could. I still remember the taste of blood, so I know I hurt him pretty bad. Thankfully, this caught him off guard as he finally let me go. I knew this was my one chance to get away from this weirdo, so I booked it to my quad as he winced in pain. "You little get the over here," he cried in anger. I knew I didn't have much time, so I jumped on my quad and turned the key as fast as I could. It started up, and just as I pulled the gas handle, I felt a hand start to grab my neck. Luckily, he didn't have a grip yet. As I was already starting to drive away, I punched it and Ned the hell out of there. At this point, all I could hear was the sound of my quad, so I wasn't sure if he was running after me, but I wasn't going to look, as I could possibly crash and be out of luck. I drove down that dirt path as fast as the quad would go, probably the fastest I've ever driven it. When I got home, I peeled out into the dirt and ran into the house, hoping to God my mom was home. I burst into her room bawling, and there she was. She asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't talk yet as I was so afraid. I just kept bawling. I think I cried for a good 30 minutes before I could summon up the strength to stop and tell her what happened. I remember the fear in her eyes as I described what happened. She pulled me close to her and hugged me as hard as she ever had. The next day, I talked to a police officer and recounted the story of what transpired. I honestly don't remember much after this, as I think I started to block it out. It's not really something a 10-year-old wants to think about. Needless to say, they never let me off the property again. My dad started drinking, and we lost a house soon after this anyway, so I didn't have to live there much longer. Recently, I was thinking about that day after I started trying to remember various parts of my childhood. My parents had never told me what happened after the cops were called, and I had never really asked because I tried not to think about it. So yesterday I went to my mother's house and asked her if they ever found the guy, considering he had to live pretty close to our property. She was kind of startled by the question because we hadn't talked about this in 15 years. She paused for a minute, as if pondering whether to tell me, and said, "We didn't have any neighbors out that way. It was all corporate-owned land, and the description you gave didn't match any of the neighbors in the other direction. We called the cops, and they went to search where you told us you were, but the guy was long gone by the time they got there. They looked around the property and found an abandoned house that hadn't been used in years since the land was purchased. When they looked inside, they could tell that he'd been staying there. Apparently, he had left his stuff behind. We never told you this because you were way too young, but one of the things they found was a black grocery bag. It had a roll of duct tape and a hunting knife inside. Thanks, Mom, but did I really need to know that? Okay, so the offense happened when I was in 5th grade about 4 years ago, and my revenge happened in 8th grade just about 1 year ago, so I was in 5th grade. Almost at the end of the year, I was pumped because I just finished all my subjects with 100% no points lost at all, which also meant I was at the top of my grade. Also, I had gotten 242 at my mathematics MAP testing. For those who don't know, MAP is measurement of academic progress. It really doesn't do anything. Teachers just use it to know how much one knows, and in the program we used for our MAP testing, 242 was a really high score in elementary. What is expected of a 5th grade genius is in the 230s range. This is important for Later, so I was just minding my own business going back to class after break when this 5th grade teacher intercepted me. Now you need to understand that we had 4 classes like most schools with an ABCD system. I was lucky and got 5B, which has the coolest teacher. He genuinely loved teaching. 5A, however, was unfortunate. He treated his students like trophies, taking credit for their high grades, but as I've heard from my friends over there, he barely taught. He would come to school strolling in really late, shout at the students for no apparent reason, just sit there at his desk while the good kids who actually cared worked, and the others just sat there. If anyone made a peep, detention and a disciplinary referral. Those things, if the offense was serious enough, could ban you from entering any college. He even threatened some poor kid who did nothing wrong with putting in a disciplinary referral in for drug possession. What the he wanted to accuse a 10-year-old with drug possession, but that's not our story. Anyways, that never really liked me. I think it was because I had such high marks and he couldn't credit himself for them. So anyways, back to the story where I bumped into him. Sorry, sir, I mumbled, and then just scooted past him. After that, for some obscure reason, he became pissed off. Come back, he shouted me, being dumb and scared. Stupidly came back. He told me to enter his class, which was full with his students. He then started to shout at me about being disrespectful, and he was so mad that I was shaking in my size 3 shoes. What he said after was, "What really up to me? You know what, in South Africa I am in my legal right to hurt you with my knife." He then proceeded to get a knife out of the top drawer and put it against my skin, breaking it a little. We weren't in South Africa, we were in Saudi Arabia. But he was from South Africa. Then he pointed at another kid and shouted, "Look at this kid, he's got 236 at his map testing. That means he's a genius. Try to get higher than him, smartass. You think you're so smart, huh? You're just a spoiled little brat." 5A took the test before 5B, so I didn't set the record for 242 yet. After that, I took the map test, and he proctored us. He kept smirking at me, kicking my seat and other stuff until I finished the test and got 242. Then I looked at him in the eye and said, "Looks like I'm a genius too." But that wasn't the revenge, you see. I thought it was some hazing ritual to see if I was tough enough for middle school. I know, stupid, but remember, I was 9 years old at the time. Fast forward 3 years to 8th grade. I did not speak of this to anybody, and the kids who were there were too scared to speak up. Anyways, I chose to tell my best friend. He was horrified and told me to report him immediately. I've realized what he did traumatized me. I was constantly afraid that any adult had a knife up their sleeve and was about to start shouting at me, so I set myself for revenge. I was not just going to report him, which would get him fired. I went to everybody at that class documenting all the horrible things he did, with over 30 kids saying the same thing, with a model student vouching for them. The principal had no choice but to comply, and he knew of the constant trust issues I was having, so he fired him and assured me that he was banned from any teaching position in the country. I live in the deep mountains. I'm talking a 45-minute drive to the nearest small town. We are nearly completely isolated and surrounded on all sides by thousands of acres of national forest. It is the real deal to live there, and not uncommon for large predators to roam through our property. Grizzlies, lions, wolves, and all that. To help combat this, my wife and I have several large shepherd dogs that roam the property. They do an excellent job of rerouting wildlife around the property, marking and just being good survival companions. If something goes bump in the night, either the dogs freak out or they don't. After a while, you learn to inter their barking and growling. From bats hit panic when a bear's outside to annoy I'm trying to sleep, yapping when a raccoon gets in the trash. Still, you never get fully used to them barking in the night. There's always a what if in the back of your head. Well, I let them inside to eat at night, or when it's too cold to be outside. One December evening, my wife and I had them in, and we were watching Planet Earth. No big deal, where we were all a big happy family gathered around the TV. My shepherds loved to watch the television, see all the cool animals. We had watched several episodes, and they never made a peep when they saw sharks, elephants, kodo, hyenas, whatever came up. Then came the mountain episode, and they were on high alert but still calm until they cut to a night vision scene of a mountain lion stalking in the dark. They all lost it, nearly knocked over the TV trying to attack it. Our youngest pup, who's still 80 pounds, jumped on our laps and was visibly shaking and full tilt, barking and growling. It was unnerving to say the least. We get lions around here, but to see how keen the dogs were on just a clip of one really demonstrated not only the fact that they were intimately familiar with the threat, but that they instinctively knew what one looked like preying in the night. It was an inherent threat, and they not only knew it, but were scared to death of it. We'd watched hundreds of hours of shows with them and never once got that reaction before. All right, thanks for sticking with me this far. Here's the your pants scary part of the story. I really don't even like writing it because the whole thing still freaks us out to this day. We are again all inside on a cold winter night. My wife and I sit down to watch some TV, and the dogs gather around. Intently, I decide to throw on a stupid alien documentary my friend recommended. The dogs watch closely but seem normal. Then the documentary shows some supposed pictures of grings lurking in the night. The dogs lose it worse than the mountain lions. Holy, we have to turn off the TV to stop the dogs from destroying the house, and even then they're really freaked out, tucked tails whimpering the works. Again, we watch TV with them all the time, and nothing has ever got them riled up, let alone full panic, except for these two instances. After we calmed the dogs down, my wife and I sat in silence for a long while as the horror slowly washed over us. That what if when you hear the dogs freaking out in the middle of the night, apparently could be aliens. Not cool. So I recently had a few encounters with a delivery guy. First was he asked me, "Are you Amy Beck from 12 Willow Street? You moved, huh?" while smiling creepily. I thought he was just a delivery guy that was trying to do small talk, so I brushed him off. I live alone, so I thought I was just overthinking by being creeped out. Then I realized after I thought about it that he was my neighbor in my previous address. He struck up a lot of conversation with me, saying he knows one of my friends. I don't like talking to strangers, so I didn't talk with him long, but it stayed with me because I felt uncomfortable with him, almost like he was dangerous. After that I was going out, and I saw him again delivering to my neighbor, and I ignored him trying to walk by. He saw me and recognized me even though I was wearing a mask, and asked the same question again. After that, due to me not going out much, I didn't see him as often. There was this one time he was standing in front of my neighbor's house, but I just walked by. Then I saw him in my Facebook friend requests, and I just ignored him again, but I was obviously creeped out, so I told my friend that. He said he knew. At first my friend said she didn't know anyone with that name, but his last name made her recognize him as a son of a family friend. They never talked. His family didn't know he was working as a delivery guy, and he was laid off because he became obsessed with his boss, who was much older than his mom. I also lost my keys, so I asked my landlord for a replacement. I didn't think much of it until I got home to my door open. Obviously, I was cautious, but there was no one at my apartment, so I sighed in relief, thinking maybe I had left it open. I work night shift, so sometimes my mind is all over the place. Now that I'm thinking about it, I overlooked a lot of things, and I'm thinking of installing CCTV in front of my apartment. I'm still scared though, because he knows my address for an update. My friend told me to report him to the police, but I'm too scared because they might just let him go and he'll take revenge on me. She also told me that he might be doing drugs as told by his family, since he was acting really suspicious, and for the last update so far I haven't encountered him anymore. Though I don't really go out much. I said my delivery name to my boyfriends, maybe because his family knew and talked to him. I haven't caught anything strange around my house either. I think I'm in a safe zone now. I'm going to move to a different city in a few months after this, probably with my dog. My boyfriend is another problem, since he can't move in because his parents won't let him. If only he was worried about me as you guys. Maybe I'll just go get another boyfriend. I live on a main road in kind of a sketchy area, not completely unsafe, but an area I've posted about on here because of some of the creepy stuff that has happened to me, but this one is the creepiest. I'd gone out at around 6 for food. It recently snowed, and my city sucks at sidewalk plowing, so it's an Arctic exhibition for a few days, walking through deep snow and ice. As I trudged through, I passed a man who lives in my neighborhood, and he can act strange. He walks oddly and can be pretty creepy at times. He passes me one way, I pass him the other, and we go separate ways. After I got my food, walking back, I thought I saw him coming my way. I quietly out loud said, "Oh man, not him," but then slowly faded away. This person walked off the path towards the church on the street. This church has a big LED sign which you can hide behind. As I got closer, I realized it was a younger man, about my age, with a gray hoodie and beige cargo pants. He was acting strange. He walked like a Disney cartoon character, and his face had a big smile with eyes shifting at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Then I saw, as he looked at me, approach quickly, pulled his hood over his head and stepped beside the sign, obstructing my view of him. I don't know if he saw me see him, but I realized what might be going down. I just stopped on the path from the snow. It would have been too much to turn around and head back. My boots were getting sucked into the slushy, snowy path. I waited for a few moments, and he must have realized then. That I knew because he came back out from the sign and went up to the church windows. The church is also a community center, and there's a room facing the street that looks kind of like a dance room with a large mirror. He took off his hood and started fake dancing around in front of the window. He kept looking back, as if his little distraction would have been enough to end my interest in a what the is happening situation, but it didn't. It disturbed me even more when he realized this. We made a sort of shuffle around each other. His smile disappeared, and he kept trying to inch his way towards me, but he got bogged down in the same slush that I stopped in. After I got farther away, I just watched as he put his hood up again and walked away normally, now towards the restaurant and mall I had just come from. This area gets stranger and stranger every day. My wife passed away after many years battling a degenerative disease. We were married 13 years, and after several months of not being able to find my footing, I made a decision to move out of state and start a new chapter, to force myself into beginning a new life. I was immediately validated by getting my first job in over 8 years. Things slowly begin to start moving forward, and after prodding from my friends, I signed up for a mobile dating app. Met a couple of people that I didn't really have a lot of chemistry with. The first date I went on was cordial, but not of any consequence. She wound up asking me to fix a laptop she had. The second person I met called me, and we decided to meet for Chinese food. Since I didn't have a car, I walked the 5 or 6 blocks, but not before it started to rain. She'd already sat at a table and was waiting for me to arrive. We exchanged pleasantries, and soon it's all about her divorce and why she lost her kids and all of the legal proceedings of her current cases. Okay, and then she would pause, clasp my hands on the table, turn her head, lean in a bit, and say, "But that's nothing compared to what you went through. Tell me about your dead wife." Like clockwork, she would ramble on about the craziest stuff, about how they're all trying to get her, then stop her crazy babbling and ask about my details and how bad it felt, and my poor wife's decline in condition. I had only put in my profile that I was a widower, nothing else. It was at this point that I got seriously weirded out, deep in my gut. Fully weirded out. What I couldn't figure out was she trying to mimic what she thought a sensitive person would be like? Or was there a possibility that she wanted to know those painful graphic details for other perverted reasons? I made short work of the entree and paid the entire her check. She called my phone a few times, and I made several excuses why I was unable to meet again. I got a couple of calls from block numbers that didn't say anything, but they stopped after a month or two. I'm blessed and remarried, but I'm so grateful I ned the right out of there and never messed with this lady again. I'm a thin, athletic white guy, 5 feet 9 inches, not the most intimidating presence, but I happen to have a nice bulky coat on that probably added some uncertainty. Also my savior, because, as mentioned, not a bear would be my situational awareness. Anyway, story time. It's 2:30 a.m. or so, and it's my favorite time to do laundry. There's a 24/7 auto electronic laundromat right by my apartment. While there's employees there during business hours, there's roughly an 8-hour stretch where I'm the only one who will be in the building. I'll occasionally see an old-timer around 4:30 to 5 a.m., but usually only on Sundays, which I avoid. It's literally a half-mile from my place. I sit down there. It's a cold night, well below freezing. I toss in my clothes, soap, and swipe the laundry card. I'm on my way to grab gas milk deposit at the bank and back to my apartment to bring some things inside for my car. I do some dishes and decide to head back down. I'm usually playing a video game while running my laundry, or just procrastinate. My stuff will sit for up to an hour. Sometimes there's no one there, so hey, not this time. It's now just shy of 3 a.m., and I get the notification that my laundry is done on my phone as I'm seconds from a laundry mat parking lot. I pull in and scan the parking lot. No one here. I proceed to walk in through the front door and immediately notice someone come into the building from the far side door. A guy, maybe 6', with 2 hoodies on, both hoods up, most of his face concealed. It's unlocked and often used when the place is busy, but there were no cars there. There is a bathroom in the place. As I walk to my machines, which is about dead center in the building, I thought this person had quickly bolted back outside. Then I noticed him again. I think he had ducked, still just by the door. Mind you, we had 2 islands of laundry Machines between us, he starts up near the wall, which is on my left. I'm watching him at this point. I was hoping he'd need to use the bathroom, but he hurried past it, not a run but a very quick walk. Now he's on the opposite side near the corner of the laundry machine strip, maybe 15 feet away, and just out of my line of sight. For a moment, I didn't want to trigger the guy or appear scared, so I continued shoveling my wet clothes into the laundry cart. The adrenaline begins trickling. Hair on the back of my neck goes up before rounding the corner and crossing back into my vision. He had hesitated. I eventually turned my head to rotate back, and he kind of popped into the picture. He glanced over, and we made eye contact as I reached into my coat pocket to fist my keys. He continues up the aisle and makes a left back out the side door. I have a little blade on my keys, so I popped that open and proceeded to toss my in the dryer while scanning my surroundings the entire time. Eventually the time comes to go outside. The front doors are automatic, so I had both hands free. I literally walked out of the place wielding a knife, shaking with adrenaline, but it was a ghost town. I proceeded to my car and went home. I drove my wife into work, and I waited until about 6 to go grab my clothes. My conclusion is that I'm nearly positive that this person scoped out the laundry mat. My machine has a digital timer for the current wash. This guy entered the building within a minute of it going off and me pulling into the lot at 3 a.m. A night when it was 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Coincidence maybe, but I was scared. Either way, thanks for listening. I would love to hear your thoughts. This happened in July. I believe it was around 1 a.m. and it was still about 80 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and where I live, AC isn't very common, so I was sitting in the living room with all the windows and doors open. I head out to smoke, and since everything was open and I didn't want the house to smell like smoke, I walked down the driveway and sat on the curb. There was a man standing on the same side of the street, but a block down, just staring at me, and I got really uncomfortable, so I got up and crossed the road. The way my triplex is set up is there is a 3-car driveway, then a few stairs up that lead into the yard, and then my door to the right, my neighbors straight ahead, and some more stairs to my other neighbors upstairs. I live somewhere with a lot of homeless people, and they'll come up the driveway to look in our trash for cans or whatever, and that's fine. They never go up past the steps. So I'm standing on the other side of the road, and I watch the man stand and stare at me, and then he proceeds to walk all the way into my yard, and I start to panic as I didn't lock the doors and all the windows were open. So I start to walk down the street, and I see a man who looks normal, and I stop him and ask if he could just pretend to know me. In retrospect, this wasn't my brightest decision, but whatever. So me and this man are standing there just talking, and I'm explaining the situation, and we're both just smoking a cigarette, and we're looking at my house. I'm currently stood a few houses down. The man keeps peeking around the trail lines next to my place. He peeks around the corner a few more times and eventually walks up to me. I'm scared shitless and I'm shaking, and he asks me for a cigarette. I go to hand him one, and he says, "Why are you shaking? Are you scared?" And I said, "No, have a great night." He walks away, and the guy stands there for a little longer with me, and the scary man starts peeking around another corner just staring at me again. The guy I'm with walks me to my house, and I shut all the windows and doors, and I just dealt with the heat. I'm grateful to that random guy, and I don't know what I would have done if he wasn't there. Coming down a mountain trail at dusk, I've realized I may have lingered at the summit a bit too long. By my estimation, I have perhaps a bit less than an hour to the trailhead. I'm alone, but know the trail well and have a headlamp on me. Just as dusk fades into a moonless pitch black night, I'm rounding a corner and freeze instinctively. EY shine is reflecting back at me from the darkness about the 30-yard away. The vague outline of a large solitary black bear emerges from the forest and steps onto the trail. Facing me, it stares at me, and I stare back. Black bears live in this area. I've known this and seen them twice during the day on previous trips. Nothing like being face to face with one at night. Though I raised my hands above my head, making myself as big as possible, I scream long and loud, as guttural and fierce a man's scream I can muster. The bear pauses and chuff at me, briefly looking behind it at the forest it came from. It then slowly and casually turns away from me, walking back into the forest from where it came. The crunching sound of leaves underfoot of the bear grows quieter until the only thing I can hear is my pounding heartbeat. I realized I now have to go in the same direction as the bear went. Maybe a minute or so goes by, and I sprint. As I pass the point where the bear stood, I glance at the woods while not stopping, and seeing nothing shortly after while running, I look back behind me, back up the trail to make sure I'm not followed. I continued To periodically glance behind me while running down the mountain, I endure maybe 30 long minutes of running in pitch darkness down this mountain with my heart at 130 beats per minute, thankfully. I didn't trip or fall and injure myself. I made it back to the trailhead safely. A few years back, I was driving home after taking my dad to the airport. For a late flight, it was already dark when I left the airport, and I still had a 3-hour drive home. A few hours into the drive, I get recalculated to some windy back road highway. There were no cars or street lights, and so it was a pretty dark and creepy road. As I turned a curve, I noticed a black car come out of nowhere and start to ride my bumper. Then the blue lights. The road was so dark I had to try for a minute to find a spot with at least a few small lights where I could pull over. The officer came up to my window and asked me if I knew that my tags were expired. I thought it was kind of odd because I was driving my mom's car and she's usually pretty on top of things like that, but it was more so the way he talked that made me uneasy. He was speaking pretty fast, like he was in a hurry or something, as he's standing at my window before he even gets my license or registration. His radio beeps and tells me that he's got to go on another call. He practically runs back to the car and speeds off. I head back home, half weirded out, half thanking God that I didn't get a ticket. I kind of brush it off until I go outside to my car the next day and find that my taxes were not due to expire for 2 more months. It could have been a simple mistake, but I couldn't help recalling how weird the whole incident was. He could have misread the number, but looking back I wonder what could have happened if he was someone with bad intentions. From then on, I pull over only in well-populated areas, and if a safe option is unavailable, I call 911 to make them aware. So my grandma and I decided to drive from Illinois to Oklahoma City to visit my dad. We made it there, and I got to see a lot of my family I'd not seen in years. I lived in Oklahoma for 6 years. On the way home, my grandma asked me to pull over at the next rest stop, and I obliged. It was in the middle of a bright spring day. We both got out and headed to the ladies' room. I noticed this guy standing behind a tree just staring. It gave me the creeps, but I didn't give it another thought. My grandma gave me a shout telling me she was going back to the car. I finished up and headed outside. The creepy guy was still standing behind the tree. I walked a little faster and he started pacing me. I was about to scream when a family came around the corner to use the bathroom. It was enough to make him leave me alone. We got back on the road, and about a mile down there was a roadblock. They were stopping everyone because they were looking for a seriously deranged psychopath. I told him to check the rest stop in hopes that they would catch him. It gives me the chills to think about it today. I was only 21 at the time, but I wasn't naive. I thank that family, even though they don't know what happened. I was living in a flat share on the outskirts of a city which is known for generally being very safe. The key is Story 3. Needed to enter the main building, but often the door isn't shut properly and so doesn't lock. Not really a cost for concern for anyone in the building, as it's a very trusting neighborhood. It's around 2 a.m. and I'm laying in bed naked, completely sprawled out. Someone opens my door and enters. I figure it's one of my flatmates going to the balcony. You have to walk through my room to access it, so it's completely normal that someone might come in at this time. I've just smoked a joint and it's 2 o'clock a.m., so I opt to ignore him and pretend to be asleep. I can feel him standing there for about 2 minutes. I think maybe he's waiting for his girlfriend to join him, and maybe he stood there checking his phone. No big deal. He goes on to the balcony. Takes about 2 or 3 minutes, so I figure it's definitely him. He's smoking a cigarette. He comes back in and goes back to standing in total silence, but I'm half asleep and don't really think anything of it. The next morning, my flatmate tells me that someone broke in, came into my room, went into the room of my flatmate and rummaged through his things, went into the kitchen, and upon seeing my flatmate wake up and come to see what was going on, quickly exited the building. The only thing he stole was my pair of Marshall headphones. We were all very confused as to why they only stole my headphones as opposed to money left on the table or my flatmate's multiple cameras. For example, we spoke to our neighbors, of which there were around 15 in the building, and not one of them had noticed anything out of the ordinary. They hadn't gone into any of the other apartments. We know that most of the neighbors also don't lock their doors at night, so it sounds as if they walked up 3 flights of stairs. They ignored the other apartments with the sole intention of coming to ours, and given the stealth, it's unlikely that they were intoxicated and it was just a mistake. Nothing else came of it. The police said they'd keep an eye out, and I had to buy a new pair of headphones, but It left me thinking about what would have happened had I opened my eyes and alerted this person standing over me. Would they have hurt me? Would it be a total stranger or someone whom I've already met when I was younger, maybe around 13 to 14? I was walking to town with my mother. I live in a smallish town in England. It was a quick walk, but about 5 minutes after leaving my home, I had one of the most unsettling encounters ever. Whilst walking, there was a man approaching us. Nothing weird at this point. I thought he'd walk past us like everyone else. However, this random man leaned in towards me as he was walking past and whispered something to me. I remember it being creepy, and along the lines of him knowing where I lived. It was subtle and happened quickly. I was shocked, especially since my mother was right next to me. Bold move from a creepy guy. I recall the man being possibly in his late 20s, kind of scruffy looking, a bit chubby with longish brown hair and a beard, but I knew I'd never seen him before this point. I waited a few seconds for us to distance ourselves from the stranger, then turned to my mom, completely freaked out, and quietly asked if she heard what the guy had said. She said she didn't. I thought maybe I misinterpreted the situation or misheard him. Then we kind of brushed it off and continued with our day. I felt uneasy but tried not to think about it. The rest of the day was fairly normal until the morning after, when my dad was talking to our neighbor. Our neighbor told my dad that during the early hours of the morning there was a man lurking right outside our houses for some time, hovering around my dad's and neighbors' cars. Now this is really weird because we live in a kind of closed-off area. The only people we see outside our homes are neighbors, but even they wouldn't come right up to our doors, especially not at like 2 or 3 a.m. Even delivery drivers can't find our house most of the time because we're hidden away. This has never happened before and never happened again after this, at least to our knowledge. Of course, you can imagine how absolutely terrified I was to hear this. I explained to my dad what had happened the day before and reminded my mom, kind of an "I told you" some moment. I felt so scared to be in my own home. I remember calling my friend and talking about the situation. We researched about what we could do, but there wasn't really any action we could take. We just had to be observant and cautious. I guess I can't remember much about what happened after that, but I never saw the man again. The whole situation creeps me out, and it doesn't make any sense. The man outside my house wasn't confirmed to be the same man that walked past me earlier, as it was too dark to make out any discernible features, but it sure is an amazing coincidence if so. This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that the pandemic started, so it was a while back, but still worthy of a post. It was early 2020, and I just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She'd bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was so long they moved out, and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, and my sister pretty much rented it to me for free. I just paid for the water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten used to it. One night, after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards my door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up, thinking that it might have been mine since I'm a smoker, but after looking at the brand name, I've realized that it wasn't mine and threw it away. I didn't think much of it and just chugged it off as some throwing it at my curb. I went on with my night, and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts, this time near my porch. Needless to say, I was pissed off and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I didn't know who it was, there was nothing I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, about 1 a.m., so I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood, and it was the pandemic, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think much of it. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about, as their voice seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the front door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the door knob to be shaken, but it was Oddly quiet, I decided to walk over to my window to see if they'd walked away or changed their mind. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you could move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically started over his own steps. As he jumped back, he tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge all the while I was staring at them, frozen in fear and trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over my window, locking them and running upstairs to the storage room, where I pushed a table to the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two to come inside at any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the windows being shaken aggressively. When they realized that they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. By the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out, my sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. I honestly don't know what they wanted or why they were so determined to get in. But whoever it was, let's not meet again. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city and found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself is great. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides, with my apartment door being at the start of the corridor. My bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex walking and talking and whatever else they do from my bedroom. Last week, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, around 105 or 10:30-ish, and I had the day off, so I took a shower and hopped into bed to watch Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knock coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so and just thought that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when once again I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed, went to the door and looked through the peephole, and sure enough, it was pitch black. I once again shucked it off and went back to my room, but before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder knock. At this point, I thought it was my friends playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking on my door, and if he was, it wasn't amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at like 7:30. I believed him and hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole again, and saw nothing. I then unlocked the door and took a peek, and then I closed the door and locked it. Me being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking, so I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over it and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and ran out to the apartment hall. I heard someone booking it down the steps and heard them lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall, so I ran a few steps down before realizing that whoever this is was waiting behind the corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and called the cops. They were there within a few minutes and scanned the building and the street, but couldn't find anyone. They told me that it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone. They kept the patrol car around the entire night and the knocking stopped. It could have been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the creeps was the fact that whoever it was ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner. They didn't keep running. If it were some pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few days because I just expected to be jumped by someone when walking into my apartment, but so far nothing has come of it. I've let it go and just hope that it won't happen again. A few years ago, I was on a train home. It was a warm summer afternoon, and I remember being in a particularly good mood as I stood by the train doors. Looking out of the window, the sun was shining, I felt good, and I didn't want to spend the rest of the evening stuck indoors, so I thought why not get off the train to stop early and walk the rest of the way home. So that's what I did. I got off the train at Lewisham Station, which is around a 30-minute walk from my then home, which was situated not far from Hither Green Station, my original destination, and started slowly walking home. I could have taken a shortcut and followed a busy road towards Hither Green, but instead decided to walk the longer route through the nearby shopping center and up the busy Lewisham High Street in search of some smiles and excitement. The High Street was unusually quiet that day. I'm not sure if there was a big sporting event happening or something, but I remember there weren't as many cars or people around as usual. I had a pleasant slow walk along the High Street, enjoying every last photon I could absorb, and came to a junction where I had to turn left onto Coor Hill Road, which leads up to a hill to Hither Green Lane. As soon as I turned left onto Court Hill Road, my attention was immediately drawn to, on the opposite side of the road, a lady pushing a push chair up the hill. She had a baby in the buggy that I couldn't see at the time, and a small toddler walking and skipping alongside her, holding onto the left handle of the buggy. I smiled to myself, thinking how heartwarming they looked together, remembering back when I was that age, happily skipping along holding on to my mother's hand. They were probably 75 ahead of me when I turned onto the road, and we were walking at pretty much the same pace for no reason whatsoever ever. I decided to speed up a bit. A minute or two later, I'd gotten maybe a third of the way along the road and had closed the gap between us a bit, but they were still maybe 50 ahead of me for no reason whatsoever. I suddenly felt like jogging, so I very lazy started jogging, more like bouncing up the hill, and all I could think about was this family on the opposite side of the road. I was fixated on them. Then again, for no reason whatsoever, I suddenly wanted to cross the road, despite the fact that I lived on the left side, and crossing was the opposite of what I normally do. It made no sense for me to cross over, but I wanted to, so I step out into the road, which was totally silent with not a car in sight, and start bouncing diagonally across the road. I physically couldn't have jogged any slower. I was in this relaxed like state. I was in no hurry to get home, but had this urge to get closer to this family walking ahead of me. They were like a magnet drawing me closer. I was jogging straight towards them. I got to around 30 behind them in the middle of the road now, still not a car in sight, and decided I'd speed up a bit. Not much. I was still bouncing, but with just a little pinch more effort. They were almost at the top of the hill at this point, and I was maybe 2/3 of the way up. Suddenly, for no reason whatsoever, the toddler, a little girl, decides to dance straight into the middle of the road. Her mother, in an obvious panic, screamed at the girl to get out of the road, which instead caused the girl to panic herself, freeze to the spot, and start crying. The mother, still holding the buggy, had also frozen in panic and stood screaming. That's when I heard the engine. At the top of Coor Hill Road is a right turn that leads to Hither Green Lane. Both sides of the road have trees and brick walls lining them, so it's impossible to see around the corner. No matter which direction you're heading, vehicles often drive far too quickly when coming down the hill, and usually exit the corner at the top end of second gear around 30 miles per hour. I could hear a vehicle coming, a diesel engine by the sounds of it. It was revving hard, and the girl wasn't moving. I didn't speed up. I just kept bouncing straight up the middle of the road towards the girl at the same pace. Totally zen, totally relaxed, almost too relaxed. My mind was clear. She was facing uphill and had no idea I was coming. The mother also had no idea I was there. I got to around 10 behind them when the white van came flying around the corner. In 5 seconds' time, the van would be where I was currently standing, 10 behind this girl, and it wasn't slowing down. The girl was frozen in panic. The mother was frozen in panic. It was time to be a hero. I got to the girl and slipped one hand under each of her armpits. I look up and see the van is 2 seconds away. If that, I lifted her a foot off the ground, turned right, and took a step towards the pavement. I was still in the road. I knew the V-man was going to hit me, as there was no time, and I thought that if it did, and I was still holding the girl, that she'd end up being dragged backwards along the road with me. So instead of putting her on the ground, I stood arms out straight, holding her a foot above the pavement, thinking that after the impact had taken me out, gravity would be the stronger of the two forces and would gently pull her down towards the pavement. The van flew past And luckily, I was only clipped on the left shoulder by the wing mirror. It barely touched me. I put the girl down on the pavement, who was now standing silent and totally confused as to how she'd somehow floated the 10 feet from the middle of the road to her mother's side, span around to face me, got down on one knee and said sternly, "Hey, look at me, never go in the road again, do you hear me?" At which point she realized what had happened and started crying again. Or maybe I'm just that ugly and my face scared her. The mother, who was still frozen in fear up until this point now, stood staring at me, jaw open, wondering where the hell I'd come from. She snapped out of it and started thanking me. "Oh my God, thank you, oh my God." I just smiled, nodded and walked on. I turned and looked back and saw the mother rubbing the girl up and down, checking for injuries and hugging her. I laughed. Over the years I've replayed this event 1,000 times in my head. 2 seconds, that's all she had left from the moment I scooped her up to the moment the van flew past us was 2 seconds. If I hadn't got off the train a stop early, she was dead. If I hadn't sped up at the bottom of the hill, she was dead. If I hadn't decided to start jogging for no reason, she was dead. If I hadn't decided to cross the road and head straight towards them, she was dead. If I'd done anything differently that day, the world would have lost this beautiful little girl. I often wonder how her life turned out. She's probably a sassy teenager now. I cannot accept that everything that happened leading up to it was a random coincidence. It felt like I was being sucked towards them. Why did I start jogging uphill? Why did I cross over? Why was I so fixated on them? Why did I speed up when I was having such an enjoyable slow walk? Why was I so relaxed that even when I saw the van meters away from my face, I didn't break out of the slow jog? It's like I just knew I'd get there in time and everything would be okay. The world is weird and I have many questions. Thanks for listening. Merry Christmas. I live in a small city college town where homelessness is a big issue. Down the road from my house at the time, there's a neighborhood Walmart that I always went to whenever I would go to this Walmart. I was always looking over my shoulder because of how many homeless people tend to hang out at this particular store and have on occasion followed me in and out of the store. As a woman in general, I'm always on guard, but surrounding the circumstances surrounding the store, I tend to get very paranoid when I'm there. Anyways, in the middle of the day on a weekday, I decided to stop by said Walmart to grab something small. When I pull into this Walmart, I always try to park as close to the front as possible with my driver's side facing the store so people can see me better. This day, I couldn't find a close parking spot. I instead found the closest thing I could find, and as soon as I pulled into the parking spot, I had a sinking feeling in my gut. I looked to my left to see 2 men in a black SUV, and the driver staring at me. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, I saw the guy in the passenger seat staring at me as if the driver had told him to look over. There's no way to perfectly describe this, but the look felt almost like a KN of approval to his friend that made me feel very uneasy. Against my better judgment, I decided to turn my car off and head inside. I figured I was only getting something small, so I'd be in and out, no biggie. I grabbed what I wanted, and when I headed to the self-checkout, there was an issue that would cause me to have to move to a cashier to check me out, and the whole process ended up taking a lot longer than anticipated. While I was waiting on the cashier, I noticed the man that was in the passenger seat was pacing outside the front doors of the Walmart looking in. I immediately felt that my gut was correct from earlier and that he was waiting for me to head back to my car. I turned my back to him to check out, and when I looked back, I noticed that he walked inside the store. At this point, I thought I was crazy and that the guy is probably coming inside to get some stuff and that I'm just paranoid from past experiences at this store. Anyways, as I'm leaving, I remembered a TikTok I saw where someone said they'd interviewed a man who attacked women, and the man gave a few different reasons as to why he wouldn't attack particular women, one of them being that some women were on FaceTime. As I'm leaving the store and headed to my car, I decided to FaceTime my best friend, who I knew would answer the phone. As soon as I'm walking up to my car, she answers, and I look up to see the driver on the passenger side of his vehicle blocking my way with his back passenger door wide open. My heart immediately dropped and I asked the man to move out of the way. He looked down at my phone and then closed the door and moved out of the way. I'm assuming he looked at my phone to see if I was actually on FaceTime with someone. I quickly got into my car and started to drive away, and as I was leaving, I saw the man who was in the passenger seat coming around the corner quickly with a grin on his face and nothing in his hands from the store. I know I can be a very paranoid person, especially when it Comes to this kind of thing, however, the whole encounter felt odd and didn't add up in a way that I felt could be written off that easily. Does anyone have any thoughts? This happened only a few weeks ago. I live close to the Angeles National Forest. There are some trails within walking distance from my home that take you up into those mountains. It was a very foggy evening, and having just received some bad news over the phone, I wanted to clear my mind with a night hike. I set off at around 8 p.m. Sad boy music in my earbuds and a camelback with water and supplies. I didn't plan to be out too long, but I was definitely going to be out a while. The hike started off great, and the fog was almost sort of a novelty, very eerie and calm in a neat sort of way. The only sounds came from water dripping off the plants along the mountainside. Nobody was around, and it felt like I had the mountains to myself. I was hiking without using my flashlight, as it was like driving. High beams of light cut my visibility from about 20 feet to 10 feet. Shining the light would be like facing a wall of whiteness, and it would kill my night vision after about an hour. Things started getting weird. I was maybe 2.5 miles up the trail, and the only light came from the glow of the city behind me. It was getting darker the farther I got up and into the mountains. I started smelling smells. Synth IC. First it was perfume for a few seconds. Just a whiff. I couldn't see more than 15 feet or so in front of me at that point, so I was kind of like, kind of odd. The second smell was that of a campfire, which was also odd as there weren't any campgrounds nearby. I shrugged it off and kept going. I then got a whiff of a plant that brought me back to my childhood, as it reminded me of smelling it during summers when I would play outside with my friends. I wasn't too off-put, but it was indeed a bit strange. A little while later I noticed a dull flash out of the corner of my eye. It was light coming from a flashlight, but it was above me on the ridge, maybe 50 to 100 t up. It looked like a glow in the clouds, sort of like how a plane looks flying through a cloud. It would get brighter or dimmer based on direction, to my knowledge, though there weren't any trails up there. It's really weird. I took my earbuds out and listened. Still silence except for the light. The light would turn on, sweep, turn off, then turn on and shine in a different direction, like someone looking for something. I assumed they were having the same visibility problems I was. I had stopped completely and watched as the light would continue to turn on and off and move slowly along the ridge. I kept my earbuds out now, and I was just telling myself it was another hiker. I waited for it to pass above me and kept on. After maybe 10 minutes I heard whistling, sort of like someone calling a dog, but from a distance. I looked back, and while I was unable to orient myself due to the fog, the whistling was coming from the light that I could now see was across the canyon. I'd been walking along. In terms of distance, it was probably about 1/6 of a mile, just a faint glow through the fog. I watched it for a minute, then kept moving. After maybe another hour and a half I stopped for some water. The trail had turned from dirt to this sandy, crunchy soil. It had only gotten darker, and I was around 3,200 feet in elevation, so the city lights were not as bright anymore. I noted that my footsteps were the loudest thing out there, which was a bit unsettling. The trail twists and turns along the mountainsides, and there would be these scenic viewpoints at the turns that would give you maybe 50 feet or so to go off the trail and look over the edge into the valley. I was about 4.5 miles out at this time, so I went out to the edge of the closest view to assess if I wanted to keep going or not. I felt great, and although my cell service had been spotty, I was trying to look at sat maps to see what was ahead of me and maybe pick a turnaround point. I was also getting texts now that hadn't been able to deliver since my service was in and out, so I wanted to check those too. I'm at the edge of the view, and someone had made a little rock sculpture thing with a weird stick. I took a picture of it. I was just chilling out there for maybe 2 minutes or so and looking at the sculpture. I can't see the trail because of the fog and darkness, but I know where it is based on direction. Here's where it gets absolutely terrifying. I pull out my phone to check my texts one last time before setting off, and as soon as I look down at my phone, I hear 5 very fast footsteps from the direction of the trail. This was the sound that my feet made because of the soil, and I recognized it immediately. I instantly look in that direction, and they stopped. Completely silence. I scrambled to get my flashlight and knife out of my bag versus using my phone light and fist, and shined in that direction. A wall of fog and silence. The footsteps were not a gallop or the skittering of an animal. It was the footsteps of something running at me on 2 legs that stopped on a dime. I could feel the terror rising in my chest as I stood there frozen. I was alone in the dark up in the mountains, and something was up here with me. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes with a light facing that direction. The biggest problem was that they came from the direction of the trail that I needed to go to get back. I thought, screw this. I'm heading back. I slowly approached the trail and walked through where the sound came from and began to head back down. For maybe the next 20 minutes, every 2 minutes or so, I would quickly stop and shine the light behind me. I could have sworn maybe 2 or 3 times I heard an extra step in the distance behind me. Like something was matching my footfall to remain undetected. I was fast walking now as the visibility was still too poor to run, and I was worried. I twist an ankle. I kept my light on the whole time and had my knife out in my other hand. After maybe 30 minutes or so, I heard something crash through the brush on my right, which was the steep side of the canyon again. I cannot not see anything because of the fog. I moved to the other side of the trail and kept going. Let me tell you, that was the most determined I've been to make it down a trail. I heard other weird sounds along the way, but I ignored them and kept moving. I will never forget that night I hiked one more time on that same trail, but it was clear I had a headlamp on the whole time and a much bigger knife on my side. I also ran back down when I reached my turnaround point. This happened in October 3rd years ago while I was solo climbing here in Pekin, Colorado, and every word is true. Before I left on this trip, I got an email telling me that I had a bunch of REI reward points that were about to expire. My kit didn't really need anything, so I cashed them out on a really badass Tonto-style survival knife that I never would have bought full price. I'd been living with my parents all summer to help out with my mom's illness, so I was desperate for a bit of solitude, but I knew the trailheads sites would be crowded even late in the season because Hiron is a popular 14 my car had terrible ground clear, so no way in hell I was getting it up the 4x4 road to the trailhead. Anyway, I found a spot to park my car off to the side before the road gets too rough and hiked about 3/4 of a mile down what I initially thought was a deer trail. Surprisingly, the trail ended at a prepared campsite next to a beaver pond level dirt rock fire pit, a few beer cans. It's almost too perfect. I look around to make sure I'm not in a rancher's backyard or something, but there are no signs of structures visible, and grass was growing in the fire pit. Probably months since someone overnight here. I figured since it was October it was already sundown, and by the time I got my hammock strung up and cooked dinner it was pitch dark. The whole time I'd been using my new knife for everything, cutting lengths of paracord for the hammock tarp, opening my food. How I was making up excuses to use this thing. I wanted to hit the trail early, so I started getting ready for bed. Right after dinner, I trick off into the woods a bit to hang my bear bag at a safe distance, but when I get back my knife is gone. I was positive I'd left it at the edge of the fire pit, but I tear the whole side apart looking for it. Anyway, about halfway through I start getting that prickly feeling that I'm not alone and I'm being watched. Finally, exhausted and paranoid, I give up. I announce loud enough for anyone at the perimeter of my lights to hear, but quiet enough that it's plausible I'm talking to myself. Well, at least I still have the gun. I'm sure it sounded pretty lame, and it was a pure bluff. I had no firearms with me whatsoever. I pretended to lie down in my hammock, and after about 20 minutes or so, I hear what sounds like faint footsteps going away from me down the trail back to the road. I spent the entire night wide awake, clutching my shitty pocket knife. At first light, I break camp and shove everything in the car. Then I drive the poor thing as far up the 4x4 road as I can. I did not want to have to come back here. It was a beautiful day. I summit ahead of schedule, shared lunch with some friendly fellow hikers, and almost forgot about the whole ordeal as I walked back to the car. Now parked about 4 to 5 miles from where I camped, I noticed there was something stuck under the driver's side wiper like a parking ticket. It was my knife. I often like to go out running in the summer or whenever the weather is nice. This happened a week before I was supposed to start high school. I thought about going running that day, but I got that idea in the morning, and I run in the evening while the sun is still up, but it isn't as hot as it is in the day. And there isn't a chance for it to get hotter if I don't manage to get back in time like in the morning. Well, of course I forgot my promise to myself and only remember it around 9 p.m. Now it's the end of summer, so the sun is already setting sooner than I'm used to, but I go, I'll get back in like an hour or so. It'll be fine. I already have been putting off running, so I don't want to put it off again. I should probably mention that I'm a female, and even though a lot of girls I know change the side of the road they walk on when they See even distinctly drunk-looking guys walking. I was the one calling them scared and was ready to take on the first rogue who tried to get me. I also live in a less populated area out of town where almost everyone knows everyone, so I was feeling extra sure of my safety. What a naive fool I know. So I go out, I start my run, and it's fine. It's getting a bit dark, but I can still see the running track, so it's all good. I start to feel a bit off when I see a pair walking in front of me. When I get closer, they turn out to be just teen guys, and I run past them with no problem. When I finally reach the usual point in my run, where I turn around at a cemetery, it has gotten pretty dark out. I drink some water from my bottle and just stand there under a tree next to the gate in the territory of the cemetery, but I don't sit down where I usually do, because the bench is next to a fence, and the darkness has finally made me a little weary about being alone and having someone jumping me. It's pretty funny that that's what scared me the most at the time. When I catch my breath, I stay for a few more minutes just listening to the wind. I see a bike drive past the cemetery, taking the route I will take. While running back, I leave my resting place, and it's gotten really dark enough that I could barely see 2M in front of me. I start slowly running back after about 15 meters or so when I start hearing voices a couple more meters, and I can clearly hear someone talking. My thoughts immediately jump to a conclusion that there are at least 2 people in front of me if I'm hearing a conversation. Now I slow down even more until I get close enough to actually hear what's being said. Keep in mind it's completely dark and this road doesn't have streetlights, so I can't see anything. I get close enough to finally make out the words, and my heart sinks at what I hear. I can't recall the exact words that were said, but I did here I see this girl. I could just pull her into the bushes. There were tall bushes lining one side of the running track. As I said, at first my heart stops, but immediately after I go into fight or flight mode. I can hear my heart beating in my ears, and I'm full of adrenaline, the bad kind. I know I can't just stop, or he will know I heard what he said, so I continue to walk. But thank God that the running track is separated from the road by a small grass field, so I go to the side of the road, making some distance between us. I keep looking at him. Keep in mind I still don't even know how many people are there, but I see a square of light, presumably a phone, and then I hear him jump on his bicycle and drive off. It turned out he was talking on the phone. But just because he wasn't alone didn't mean I was less scared of him. I walk on the side of the road for a good few minutes until I'm sure he would be far away from me, and once I get back on the running track, I sprint home like crazy. All the way back I was shaking with fear and looking at the bushes and the cars that passed me with delirium, squishing my water bottle in my hand, ready to smack anyone who came close to me. When I finally reached the first road nights, I felt like I escaped death. I hope you enjoyed that, guys. If you have a scary story you would like me to read in an upcoming video, this is one way to help me guarantee variety in the stories I share. You can email me or post it to my subreddit. I'll drop the details in the video description. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my patrons and channel members who now have early access to Adri videos as well as other behind-the-scenes content. Thank you to Brock Ballard, Kim Thompson, Angela Reeves, Sher, AGI, Nathan, Shadwick, Nicholas Johnson, Samantha Place, Cheryl Duckworth, Scout Mom 405Z, Harris, Unladylike 13, Ventura, California, Elizabeth, Mays, Alexia Tuttle, Marshana Rainey, Willow Sapon, Mary Wright, Jessica Copperfield, Zoe D, Danielle Shaw, Jane Wiggins, Tara Harris, Harry, Arcali, Townsend M, Deshawn Edmondson, Kimmy Love, Wendy Maris, Confessions of a Cleaner, Megan Abrams, Miss Tycoon, Stephen Sloan, Christina Myway, Ashley Bray, Tissa Felter, Danielle, Tina Marie Heckman, Amal Garner, Lisa Redford, Deborah Malay, Connie, Sue T, Adwell, Diana Johnston, Vampy Debs, Jasmine Davis, Erica, Air Fox, Mulder Ram, Beltron, Tina, Nick, Bosie, Sarah, C.H. Neal, Kavanaugh, Tiara Sunders, Timothy Stratton, Jennifer Jenkins, Lloyd Rash, Maribel, Deluna, Michael, O.M., Ollie, Marissa, Kuro, Ember, Hops, King, Lynn, Justin, Beast, Gillespie, Joy, Dana, J. Blee, Anna, Stephanie, McLaren, Lumine, Kami, Skin, Crawler, Adarabella, Place 2006, Michelle, Welchman, Dana B, Lisa McDonald, Clary, Scott Madison, C. Wasp, Sting, Jennifer J. Ashley, Liliat, Lee, Taya Wyatt, Gina Laura, J.K. 6 Venzio, Donna, Joey Big, GSC, Tanya Spaghetti, Wello King, Matthew, October Gypsy, Lisa, Ollie Thomas, Build With Me, Letitia, Fran Debs, Insomnic Cats, Stephanie Summer, Rebecca Tyera, This Bad Kitty Your Papy Dilly Laney Tripping Balls Through History Samantha Erica. Alyssa Tracy Killian's Place April James. Aura Jen Joy Handout Pegasus Genesis Karen Kitu V. Barry LJ Fiona Xbox Scott I Like Booty Monica Level A Chris. Anana Holly Spry Kimber Jasmine Sentik. Heather Haven Kitty Cat Luna 2 ADHD Aurora Janice Cinderella Baby Borderline. Betty Lady Draco Erica Nicole Snowball Raina Melanie The Honeybee 987 Pretty. Girl 215 Ryan Brooke Wendy Crafty Kel Tina. Dina Vampy Debs Patricia Amber Krista. Brenda Absent Alice Chrissy K Spider's Web. H Lala Andrea Sue Monique Shaw Gorman. Emma Lisa Sigma Cube X Greg Chelsea. Amanda Jane Sam Zep Tay Sarah C Austin. Tegan Lil Smart Jenny Gabrielle. Fire 5 Sarah P James Gargan Gemma Allen. Monica Level A and Alex I hope you're doing well guys. I'll see you all on the next one.